Live from Brussels, where I've been attending the NatCon conference, which the Belgian police tried to close down. No alternative views are allowed in this city. We must all support ever closer union, or the old bill will come and take us away. Joining me here was the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. I've had a very long chat with her about the current state of the Conservative Party and whether Rishi should man up and leave the ECHR. I also asked her, were Brexit voters effectively betrayed by the Conservative Party since 2019? And as I speak, members of Parliament and the House of Commons are voting on a smoking ban. Does it make any sense? And is there an argument that says if you ban things or overtax things, it actually makes things worse? But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB Newsroom tonight. Downing Street says the attempt by police in Brussels to shut down the National Conservatism Conference is extremely disturbing. Officers arrived while Nigel Farage was addressing the event, giving everyone 15 minutes to leave. It's understood the order came from local Brussels Mayor Emir Keir in a move he said was to guarantee public safety. Well, Belgium's Prime Minister has weighed in on this one as well this afternoon, describing the mayor's actions as unacceptable and even unconstitutional, saying that the Belgian constitution has guaranteed the freedom of speech and peaceful assembly in the country since 1830. Well, Labour's Jonathan Ashworth questioned whether Conservatives from the UK should have been there.
I think some of the speakers, from what I understand, who have been advertised on the website for this conference, have very unsavoury views. I'm rather surprised that Suella Braverman's been allowed to go and speak at this event. Why is Rishi Sunak not getting a grip of this situation? Why is he not asking Suella Braverman to pull out of this event? Because some of the characters involved, at least according to their website, have made all kinds of comments which I don't think the Rishi Sunak's Tory party would want to associate themselves with.
Jonathan Ashworth, and more analysis on the NatCon conference coming up in Nigel's programme next. Meanwhile, in other news today, the Rwanda bill is back in the House of Lords tonight after MPs rejected a series of amendments they'd suggested, with some Conservatives calling those proposals ridiculous. Let's show you the upper chamber right now, where Lords are maintaining their standoff with the government on its flagship migration policy. They voted down each government proposal once again tonight. Downing Street, though, hoping to clear the final hurdle, they say, this week and get flights off the ground within weeks. Labour still insisting the scheme is doomed to fail. The Policing Minister, Chris Philp, said today new powers for chief constables to sack rogue officers will root out those unfit to wear the badge. Under the new powers, chief constables will be put in charge of misconduct hearings, making it easier to remove officers in their own force who are found guilty. The changes, which come into force next month, follows a review into police dismissals after the conviction of David Carrick for multiple sexual offences while serving as a police officer. The Education Secretary said today a court ruling dismissing a Muslim student's challenge against her school prayer ban now gives school heads confidence in making the right decisions to prioritise tolerance between those of different faiths. The student had argued that a no prayer ritual policy at a North London school was discriminatory, but the head teacher argued schools couldn't be forced to change their approach because one child or parent decided it was something they didn't like. Well, the judge upheld the school's position, saying there was a rational connection between the school's inclusivity, social cohesion and its prayer policy. Kemi Badenoch has become the first cabinet minister to reveal she won't be backing Rishi Sunak's proposal to ban young people from ever smoking. If you're watching on TV, let's take a look inside the Commons. Nigel referred to it just now. They're still just coming back in from voting, it looks like. That tobacco and vapes bill is being brought before those MPs for the very first time. And if it becomes law, it would be an offence to sell tobacco products to anyone born after the 1st of January 2009. The Health Secretary, Victoria Atkins, said today that she denied a ban on tobacco and vape sales would cause a black market boom. That ongoing. Full updates throughout the rest of the evening right here on GB News. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. So, on January the 30th, 2020, I stood up in the European Parliament. I waved my Union Jack flag. I said goodbye. I caught Eurostar. And today is my first public return to Brussels in 4 years. Now, I hadn't expected to be welcomed exactly with open arms by this community, but what happened today was truly extraordinary. A conference being held by NatCon, National Conservatism, run by the Edmund Burke Society, based in Washington, D.C., bringing together conservative voices from America, the UK, and the whole of Europe. Attending the conference, members of European royal families, very senior businessmen and businesswomen, elected representatives from national parliaments, from the European Parliament, leaders of political parties who will top the polls in at least 9 countries in the European Union in the June elections of this year. And tomorrow morning, due to speak, the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban. But of course, the devil of the whole piece is me. Because the others are all sceptical about Brussels, I'm the one that led a campaign for us to leave it. Indeed, I think the rest of Europe should leave it. So I'm used to being treated badly. But what happened today to me and everybody else that expresses the view that ever closer political union is not a desirable goal is, I think, truly reminiscent, in many ways, of the old Soviet Union. If you don't toe the line, you're to be banned. If you don't toe the line, you are mad, bad, probably mentally ill, and really quite dangerous. So the conference was planned a couple of months ago. 48 hours ago, the venue that was holding this conference, and that included a lunch, a big dinner, they were contacted by the mayor of Brussels, the mayor of the whole city of Brussels, a man who was very happy to have the mayor of Tehran here last year as a guest. They were contacted and it was suggested they shouldn't go ahead with the conference. They cancelled. We then moved on yesterday morning to a place, a Sofitel in Place Jourdain. And last night, at about 7:30, the local mayor of that district of Brussels, a Belgian liberal, a friend of my friend Guy Verhofstadt, said the conference can't go ahead. At 9 o'clock last night, the NatCon organisers found a venue in the Saint-Josse district of Brussels, run by a Tunisian businessman. It's effectively a nightclub. He said, look, I don't care what your opinions are, provided you stick within the law and don't smash the place up, I'm very happy to have your business. And yet, the local mayor of Saint-Josse, a man who has been kicked out of the Belgian Socialist Party because of his links with extremist Islamist groups in Turkey, applied pressure on a level you can't believe, directly telephoning the owner of the club, the owner's wife being threatened online, suppliers who were due to bring in cutlery, crockery, food, drinks for lunch being told, you deliver to this venue, to this event, and you will go out of business. And I turned up in the middle of all of this, and whilst I was on stage, the Belgian police came into the venue with an instruction from the local mayor to close down the meeting. Now, there were only 3 of them. There were many, many high hundreds inside the room. There were also TV cameras there from all over the world. And the police kind of bottled out of doing it, but closed the venue, didn't allow anyone else in, including former French presidential candidate Eric Zemmour, who was denied entry to the building. Later on, the police were there in riot gear, fearing for public order. Now, there was no danger of public order from within the room, but a counter-demonstration was planned, at which about 5 or 6 saddos turned up to say, we shouldn't be there, we're not entitled to our views. It has been truly the most extraordinary day in Brussels. Now, for me, this is nothing. In my last years here, I was barred from coffee bars, barred from restaurants, even barred from a pub I've been using for 20 years. But today, they brought that cancel culture, they brought that intolerance onto the world stage. And now, from British TV stations across America and the whole of Europe, everyone can see the true face of this European Union. And yet, when we come to the British Labour Party, this is what Jonathan Ashworth had to say earlier on today.
I think some of the speakers, from what I understand, who have been advertised on the website for this conference have very unsavoury views. I'm rather surprised that Suella Braverman's been allowed to go and speak at this event. Why is Rishi Sunak not getting a grip of this situation? Why is he not asking Suella Braverman to pull out of this event? Because some of the characters involved, at least according to their website, have made all kinds of comments which I don't think the Rishi Sunak's Tory party would want to associate themselves with.
And just to prove what the new Labour government will be like, he was backed up by rising star of the Labour movement, Wes Streeting.
And of course a source close to the Right Honourable Member for Fareham, who couldn't be here today with us, Mr Deputy Speaker, because she's currently in Brussels surrounded by the police who are trying to shut down the event she's attended with some far-right fanatics with whom she has much in common. She said that she is not a fan of the bill. Well, now she knows how the rest of us feel about the Right Honourable Member for Fareham too.
Can you see what's coming down the line with a new Labour government, given that Sir John Curtis, the doyen of political commentators, says it's 99% certain that the next time we have a Prime Minister, it is going to be Keir Starmer? Well, I'm very pleased to say that Rishi Sunak's official spokesman said, clearly, these reports are extremely disturbing. Even the Prime Minister of Belgium, which is not a country I've always had great relations with, said what happened at the Claridge, the name of the club today, is unacceptable. Yanis Varoufakis, the hard lefty who for a time was the finance minister in Greece, has said, I'm no political friend of Nigel Farage, but I would hate it if anyone like Nigel was prevented from speaking merely because he may say things that may annoy, among other people, myself. And the Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, has said, what is happening in Brussels leaves us in disbelief and dismay. So apart from the nerdy, puritanical types that Keir Starmer wants to make our future cabinet ministers, across the board, across a wide political spectrum, what has happened today has met with absolute condemnation, and so it should. Let me tell you something. If at any point in the last 4 years I'd ever for one moment doubted Brexit, or at least doubted how it had been conducted by a Conservative government, what I saw today in Brussels absolutely confirmed to me that leaving this monstrous union, with its deep intolerance, with its refusal to accept that anybody else can have an alternative point of view, today proved to me that Brexit absolutely was the right thing to do. Next up on the stage after me was former British Home Secretary Suella Braverman. I asked her a whole series of questions, especially about Sunak's plan, whether leaving the ECHR was possible under a Conservative government, and whether Brexit voters ought to feel betrayed by this Conservative Party. All of that in just a moment.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Is it okay to call people fat? I won't call Bev fat because she isn't. She won't call me fat because I'm not. But the fitness fanatic, Derek Evans, you might know him better as 90s icon Mr Motivator, recently told a podcast, diabetes have gone through the roof. You should be able to call people fat.
Well, he joins us now. Good morning, Derek. Good morning.
Good morning.
Great to see you. So I think what you're getting at is this idea that we've become so polite about weight that we're ignoring the elephant in the room. If you'll forgive the phraseology there, and actually sometimes you've got to be cruel to be kind.
Well, actually, this has been taken out of all context. I actually didn't say you're entitled to call people fat. What I did say is that in the 80s and 90s, I remember the way I got into television, there was a gentleman walking at reception while I was waiting for the people I was training. And for some reason, I got up and I prodded him in the belly. And I said to him, you need to deal with that. That was fat. We have a nation where obesity, diabetes is killing every one of us. And unless we take responsibility for our health, rather than waiting for government to do this, government to do that, it is our responsibility, right, to look after our independence and our health. And as we get older, it's even more critical, right? And that's why I'm here as an example saying to you, listen, I'm 71 years of age and movement is medicine. And you can't sit around watching television and not going out to the gym or wherever. You will never, ever be able to look after your family and everything you've worked for. You will lose it. I've never seen a deposit account behind a hearse. No matter what you work for, the most important thing you can do with your life is every hour, do something active. Every hour.
Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, I was supposed to sit down at the back of the venue with the former British Home Secretary Suella Braverman to have a chat with her. But of course, we left because we feared the police might storm the place at any moment. And the last thing either of us wanted to get involved in were fisticuffs of any kind. So we went away to a hotel. Well, I asked her a series of questions. Her speech was very, very deeply critical of the European Court of Human Rights, and in particular, the recent ruling apropos Switzerland that says that any country that is signed up to the ECHR has to adopt net zero policies. And I went on to ask her whether Rishi Sunak had the courage to do anything about it, and I finished up by asking her, effectively, had Brexit voters been betrayed by the massive immigration numbers? Escaped from Claridge. At some point this afternoon, the police will close it down. I escaped, but also I'm very pleased to say that safely escaped is the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. We're here, Suella, because we were supposed to have a sit-down in the venue, but they wanted to close the conference. What do you make of it?
It's pretty astonishing, Nigel, isn't it? Thankfully, you and I got to make our speeches in favour of controlling our borders and protecting our communities amongst like-minded Democrats. Many of us there are democratically elected politicians. Many of us are leaders in our field, academics, thinkers, writers. And it's frankly staggering that the Mayor of Brussels has deployed his thought police to cancel what is a peaceful event focused on how we can better represent the millions of people around the European continent.
I felt this morning, if ever I doubted for a minute, not that I did really, but what Brexit was about, the fact this conference was questioning ever closer union within the European Union. And since the judgment, the Swiss judgment recently, the role of the ECHR, didn't that really tell us we're on the right track?
Well, there's obviously that. I mean, the hypocrisy is also astonishing. Only last year, the Mayor of Brussels hosted the Mayor of Tehran here in Brussels. So he's okay to have the Mayor of an autocratic regime in his city. But those of us who want to talk about rights radicalism, as I spoke about today, or standing up for sovereignty and democracy, are, they attempt to cancel us. And I remember the words of Mrs. Thatcher. I'm going to misquote her now, but she said she always got cheered up when she saw her opponents take ever more ridiculous and extremist and far-fetched attempts to shut her down, because it just shows they've lost the political argument.
Yeah, I mean, I'm used to it. I mean, I was barred here from restaurants, barred from coffee shops, pubs, but that was a private thing. I mean, this was, the global media were there, seeing a very respectable, as you say, group of people. I mean, European royalty, Prime Minister coming tomorrow of Hungary. It is truly, truly extraordinary. Are we sort of in danger of slipping back to sort of communism, fascism? And how would you characterise it?
Well, I think it's incredibly concerning that we're seeing here an attempt to snuff out and stamp out freedom of speech. You and I are conservative politicians, centre-right politicians who voted to leave the European Union through a democratic and legitimate process. And here we are trying to explore those ideas, me talking about rights radicalism and the overreach by the Strasbourg court and the totally unreasonable way in which human rights have taken over and stymied the government's ability to stop the boats. The reason why we've not managed to stop the boats in the UK is because the Strasbourg court intervened at the 11th hour through an opaque process without reasons to stop us sending flights to Rwanda. That's what I was talking about here, speaking on behalf of the British people, on behalf of my constituents who've sent me to Parliament to stop the boats. And talking about that surely cannot be a criminal activity.
And of course, by implication from a Swiss ruling, now, as members of ECHR, we have to pursue net zero policies.
You're absolutely right. It was an egregious decision that we saw a few weeks ago from the Strasbourg court against the Swiss government on climate change. The Strasbourg court has totally overreached and usurped the legitimate authority of democratically elected governments. The Swiss people themselves voted in a referendum against so-called climate change, net zero policies, and yet the Strasbourg court overruled that democratic instruction and imposed its own rule on the Swiss government, which really does symbolise a kind of net zero madness. But that's symbolic and symptomatic of the broader problem. That's why I was calling today in my speech that we need to leave the European Convention of Human Rights, and we need to do it now. It's no good putting it in a manifesto for the Conservative Party at the next general election. It's no good putting off the debate. We've had 4 years talking about the boats, talking about illegal migration. We're now on our third Act of Parliament. This week, voting on our third Act of Parliament. We've not succeeded in stopping the boats. The British people are fed up with 30,000 people last year crossing the Channel, £6 million a day being spent on the hotels. I tried, and when I was Home Secretary, to fix this. Unfortunately, I was blocked by the Prime Minister. But I've come to the view, and I was calling for it since 2022, that we now need to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. We need to do it now.
But it's not going to happen, is it?
Well, listen, I will keep calling for it. And if the Prime Minister is serious about stopping the boats, he said he would do whatever it takes. If he really means that, he will do whatever it takes. That means invoking or triggering Article 58 of the European Convention on Human Rights, sending a letter...
Which is 6 months, isn't it?
6-month notice to the Council of Europe, possibly passing an Act of Parliament, because we might need to do that to confirm the departure from the Convention, and actually delivering for the British people, because it's human rights laws, it's the Strasbourg judges, and it's this distorted approach to civil liberties that has stopped us from delivering for the British people. And it's not just the boats, but it's on stopping terrorists from being in the country. It's about deporting foreign paedophiles and drug dealers.
Abu Qatada took 10 years to remove from the country because of ECHR, so I completely get where you're at. So if Rishi Sunak in the next manifesto says, we will continue to pursue our policies, but if the ECHR defy us, we'll consider leaving, should we believe him?
Listen, Nigel, I worked very closely with the Prime Minister on this issue for over a year, and his view, as expressed to me, was that he does not support leaving the European Convention on Human Rights. And we're hearing a lot of noises from him right now. I do believe the British people would see them as inauthentic. I think if he's really serious about stopping the boats, he'll do what is necessary. And what's necessary is invoking Article 58 now.
And he has a parliamentary majority, so he could do it.
He could do it. I believe he could do it. And he could deliver a withdrawal from the convention before the next election. Let's fight the next election on it. Let's force Keir Starmer's hand, because I tell you, it would be great to see the Labour Party campaign to hand back control to Strasbourg, hand back, control over our borders to a foreign court. Let's have that debate. Let's have that debate with the British public. But the Prime Minister has the authority. He has a majority, I believe, to deliver what's necessary to actually stop the boats.
I will watch this space but not hold my breath. Is it a betrayal?
Listen, I think that it's very disappointing. I myself have battled very hard within government to lower migration. And what I've come up against is institutional resistance, whether it's from the OBR, which, as I said, takes a view...
You're sounding like Liz Truss.
The OBR takes a view which is very opposed to lower migration.
So how does the next election look as a sitting Conservative Member of Parliament? Is it going to be a bad night or a total catastrophe?
Listen, Nigel, I've been very open about my profound concerns about the way the party is heading, and I've been very clear that the Prime Minister needs to change course. Any poll that you look at every day now suggests that we're heading for electoral defeat, and I am horrified personally by the prospect of a Keir Starmer government. He's someone who would reverse Brexit. He's someone who campaigned for a second referendum.
Are you saying constitutionally he'd reverse Brexit by rejoining the EU?
Listen, I would not rule it out, because he's someone who campaigned for a second referendum, and all the indications from his shadow cabinet and indeed himself and his unguarded moments are that he does want closer alignment with the European Union. He would undo what was achieved in 2017 in that historic vote. He would oversee increased migration, and he would not apologise or try to hide it.
Well, I must say, that was a very spirited Suella Braverman. It really was. Now, I'm joined down the line from London by GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Nigel, your reaction to the police, 3 mayors in Brussels attempting to close down this meeting, and, if I may, the response of a couple of Labour frontbenchers.
Well, I think the first thing you need to do, Nigel, is to go to the European Court of Human Rights and complain about the mayors for trying to close down your free speech. As far as back in London goes, I think Rishi Sunak was right. No, it's appalling to do something like this. This was a matter of free speech. As far as I can understand from a few hundred miles away, there was no question of public disorder outside, so there was absolutely no reason to take the action they did. And the other weird thing they've done is they've given you the oxygen of publicity. It's quite likely your conference would not have got the kind of reporting it has had they not taken this action.
No, well, that's absolutely right, Nigel. I must say, when banks close my accounts or when the police move in during a speech I give, I generally find that I come out better than those that are trying to cancel me. But the attitude, I mean, come on. John Ashworth, Wes Streeting, I mean, this was real sort of hair shirt puritanism, that only our view's acceptable, nobody else should really say these things. I mean, is Keir Starmer's Labour Party that politically correct and that intolerant?
Well, no, I mean, I think that the answer was they should have ignored it completely, that they didn't have to make any comments about it, and probably better if they hadn't. I mean, quite clearly, we're talking about a free speech issue here, and certainly that is what Keir Starmer's Labour Party is committed to, which is why there's not a row they needed to get into.
No, I think that's right. Better to have said nothing. Now, ECHR. Suella put ECHR right at the heart of her speech. She's urging Sunak to do something about it. Now, obviously, he won't. But can you see ECHR becoming a big election issue in terms of manifestos?
Well, it'll be an election issue because obviously immigration is going to be a fairly major election issue, but it won't be the top one. I mean, the polls are fairly consistent. What people most care about is the cost of living crisis. Then they care about the NHS and not being able to get hospital ops. And immigration comes below that. When it comes down to the ECHR, Rishi Sunak is absolutely right. We should not be taking Britain out of international law and our international obligations, which is what would happen with the ECHR. He also has that huge practical difficulty that if you do leave the ECHR, you would then undermine the Good Friday Agreement, and it's very difficult to see how that could be put back together if you went that route. What he's more likely to do is ignore any more Article 39s and just see what the European Court does.
That may be right. Talking of international law, Suella thinks that Keir Starmer might take us back into the European Union. I have to say, I view that as being unlikely.
Well, I would go further and say it's complete and utter nonsense. And she was saying that there were indications that the Labour Party were moving in that direction. They're not. I'd love to see the indications that Suella Braverman was talking about. Brexit is done. Those of us who are on the Remain side, we lost. There's nothing we can do about that. What we have to do is make the best of it, and that is the policy of the Labour Party.
Nigel Nelson, as ever, thank you for joining me. Well, as we speak in the House of Commons, members of Parliament, a Labour Party whip and most Conservatives are voting to introduce a piece of legislation banning smoking for anybody aged 14 who will never be able to buy vapes or tobacco products for the rest of their lives. In a minute, we'll get a full analysis from Christopher Hope from the House of Commons, from the Palace of Westminster, and a debate about whether it makes any sense at all.
Hello and welcome back to the latest update from the Met Office. Some showers will continue overnight, but otherwise it turns drier with clear spells and it turns chilly in places with our air now coming from the north. That's a cold direction. With isobars opening out as well, lighter winds will mean a greater chance of a frost. There will be widespread clear skies across the UK as the showers fade away, although one or two showers will continue across Northern Ireland, parts of Wales and the southwest, more especially for northeast Scotland, the North Sea coast as well. Some of the showers in northern Scotland will be falling as snow because it's going to be a cold night, touch of frost here and there as we start off Wednesday. But beautiful blue skies for many of us, particularly through this central swathe of the UK. I think still the north and east of Scotland, eastern England, seeing a brisk breeze from the north and some showers. Also some showers elsewhere from the word go, but generally turning drier in many places by the afternoon, albeit rather cloudy. Northern Ireland seeing rain arrive, and it will feel cold here, 7 Celsius, not much better elsewhere, 11 to 13 degrees at their highest in the south. But Thursday starts off bright once again, chilly in places, and we keep the brightness across the south and southeast well into the afternoon, whilst the cloud thickens across the north and northwest, with outbreaks of rain moving south across Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. The rain clears up on Friday. The weekend looks very nice indeed.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
We live in an age when banning things is incredibly popular. Indeed, if you poll the British public on banning things, they say, yeah, ban everything. And of course, our MPs feel much the same way. So we have these votes that have been taking place tonight in the House of Commons about one of Rishi Sunak's key electoral promises, which is that anybody aged 14 will never, ever be able to buy a vape or a tobacco product. I personally think the whole thing's bonkers. When you make things illegal, all you do is create a black market. But Christopher Hope, our political editor, joins me from the Palace of Westminster. I have no doubt our MPs have voted overwhelmingly, Christopher, to ban.
Nigel, that's right. There's been 383 MPs voted in favour of the ban, 67 against. Most Tory MPs appear to have abstained. Labour, of course, whipped their MP to vote in favour of the ban. We've had Kevin Badenoch, Robert Jenrick, Suella Braverman, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Liz Truss and Sir Jake Berry, the former party chairman. They all voted against. Robert Jenrick, some big speeches from the backbenches. Robert Jenrick's speech was interesting for saying, let's educate more and ban less. But with me now is one of those MPs who voted against, Sir Jake Berry. Sir Jake, you gave a speech there in the Commons which struck many as being almost a kind of a cri de coeur for Tory right-wingers. What were you saying?
What I say, Chris, look, to me this is a debate about what sort of country you want to live in. Do you want to live in a country where the government tells you what car to buy, what central heating you can have in your phone, looks to arrest you for misgendering people? I believe in freedom. And if you are free as a nation, it's freedom to make good choices as well as bad choices. I know we're on Nigel's show. I know he likes the odd cigarette. That may be a bad choice, but he needs to be free to make it. And the idea that we are going to create different levels of freedom for our citizens. People talk about there's a ban for a 15-year-old. What will happen when they're 40? Forget when they're 40, Chris. They're going to be 18 in 3 years' time. So in 3 years' time, we're going to say to citizens, some of you can smoke and have the freedom to make that decision. I hope they don't, by the way. But others of you will never have the opportunity to do so. This is slipping towards a sort of social democratic, socialist country. Frankly, if all freedom means to you is you have the freedom to do what the government tells you can do, you may as well move to Russia or China, because they're the sort of regimes that take these sort of ridiculous powers over their people for the good of themselves to try and stop them doing things like smoking. It's just crazy, and that's why I was proud to vote against it this evening.
So why on earth, as a Tory government, led by Rishi Sunak, proposed and pushed this through Parliament?
Well, you tell me. And the real question I would also put to them, why not put it in a manifesto? We are within just 3 to 4 months of Parliament being dissolved. We could go to the people and say, look, do you think this is the right thing to do? If the majority of people voted for it, I wouldn't be happy, but I'd still at least say there's majority support. No member of Parliament, no Prime Minister, no leader of the opposition has a mandate to do this. This has fallen out of a blue sky. It's sort of governmentitis. It's, civil servants sitting around thinking, what can we do to cock up the lives of ordinary British voters? How can we make their lives more miserable? And tonight, we've seen a majority of MPs, frankly not me, going along with it. And I think it says something really terrible about Britain, Chris.
Well, Sir Jake Berry there with some real remarks there. Governmentitis has taken over the Tory party, Nigel Farage. Just briefly, in other news here, as I forecast for GB News yesterday, 4 amendments have come back to the House of Commons. They'll be voted on tomorrow on the Safety of Rwanda bill. And the expectation here in the Palace of Westminster is that the Lords will fold tomorrow and that bill will become law. But the flights won't be taking off for a few weeks yet, Nigel.
Christopher Hope and Sir Jake Berry, thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm very much in Jake Berry's camp, but somebody who I suspect is not is Dr. Rob Branston, Associate Professor in Tobacco Control Research at the University of Bath. The argument being made there by Sir Jake wasn't about the merits of smoking. It was about the merits of free choice. And I would just say this to you, Rob, that in Australia, they have overtaxed tobacco. A packet of fags in Australia is now between 35 and 40 quid in sterling terms. As a result of this, the gangs don't bother with cocaine anymore. Waste of time. The money is now in illegal cigarettes. There have been 27 firebombings of shops in Melbourne over the last few months as gangs rival for who sells illegal tobacco. And so my argument to you is that creating a cliff edge from those that are 14 years old and 15 years old today, and as we go on, all it does is introduce a black market and criminality, and I just don't think this is the way forward. What say you?
Well, unsurprisingly, Nigel, I vehemently disagree. When the UK changed the age of smoking from 16 to 18, there was no increase in the market for illicit tobacco. And actually, the market for illicit tobacco is quite a complicated one. And it seemed to be a matter of enforcement rather than the incentives that criminals have. Clearly, at the moment, we have high taxation in the UK, which gives criminal gangs some degree of incentive to offer under-the-counter illicit tobacco, which is tax-free. And yet we see that it's still a relatively small part of the market. So yes, you're right to be concerned that we do need to have some enforcement measures in place to make sure that illicit doesn't become a problem. But I actually do think this is a policy that will work simply because we're talking about changing the age of buying tobacco products just by 1 year at a time. So just one generation can't smoke. So you as an individual will still be able to go into a store and legally buy tobacco products. And that, I think, is the key reason why we shouldn't expect a huge flood of illicit tobacco to be a problem when this law passes.
Well, actually, in the hand-rolling market, illicit tobacco is over half of the products sold. So there is a degree of that going on, nothing like the Australian problem at this moment in time. I mean, let me ask you frankly, Rob, would you like to ban smoking completely?
I think banning smoking completely would be very difficult because we know there are still millions of people in the UK who smoke. And I think if we were simply to ban it overnight, that simply wouldn't work and we would have the illicit problem that you mentioned earlier. So for me, this is a good policy because it introduces the age of sale requirement to a group of people who aren't used to buying tobacco products where there are very few smokers. So I think that is the crucial difference. It's one of ability to enforce the law where the law is sensible and recognises what individuals are already doing. So personally, no, I don't want to ban smoking. I want to encourage individuals to make a choice that is good for them.
OK. Final thought on this, Robin, it's a rather important one, that drugs, you know, from cannabis all the way through to heroin, are illegal, have been illegal. There are sanctions, albeit they're a bit softer these days than they were. Despite it being illegal, there are millions, literally millions of people partaking of these things every week. Doesn't the same argument apply to tobacco, that actually illegality doesn't stop anybody? It's education and mindset.
Well, certainly education and mindset are important, and that's why you see those health warning labels on tobacco products at the moment. But I think with tobacco, it goes beyond mere education because we are dealing with a product that is so vehemently addictive. Almost 2/3 of people who have just one cigarette will go on to be daily smokers. So we are dealing with a product that is designed to be addictive, where there are chemicals that are added to tobacco to increase its addictiveness. And that, I think, makes it very different to recreational drugs that are indeed illegal, because we know tobacco is a product that if it was invented today, if cigarettes were sort of tested, they would be illegal for the same reasons. So I think it's very easy to draw those parallels, but actually the products are different and need to be treated differently to recognise their different aspects.
So the argument is that nicotine is more highly addictive than most of those other illegal drugs.
I didn't say that, and I'm no medical doctor, so I wouldn't like to comment on the addictiveness of nicotine. But I've certainly read work that says it's up there as being one of the most addictive compounds. And certainly cigarettes are an incredibly efficient way of delivering that to the body. And unfortunately, they have huge negative health consequences.
On that, I think we agree. Rob Branston, thank you for joining me on the programme and joining this, I think, very important debate. In a moment, we talk about economic inactivity due to sickness is the highest since records began. Is this people just simply being lazy? What on earth are we going to do about it?
On Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, Brussels police attempt to shut down Suella Braverman and Nigel Farage.
No alternative opinion allowed. This is the updated new form of communism.
Has democracy died in Europe? Catherine Birbalsing's ban on Islamic prayer at the Michaela School has been ruled as lawful by the High Court. For once, has common sense prevailed? And I expose our idle Home Office as Vietnam soars to the top of the list of small boat migrants. But what are they doing about it? Don't miss Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11 p.m. Be there.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
I'm delighted to welcome Andrew Doyle, who was behind that comedy event in Edinburgh last night. Andrew, great stuff. Now, what's the mood like on the ground in Scotland?
Well, I mean, certainly at last night's event at Comedy Unleashed in Edinburgh, there was a sense of relief that we're all gathering and we're all laughing at this stuff. We're just laughing at the way that the police have approached this, the way the SNP have approached it. Various people from various of the protected characteristics that you must not mock or offend were mocking each other. It was just a reminder that actually these are just jokes. We're just having a laugh. We're just exercising our creative freedom and our freedom of speech. The mood, I think, is generally one of disbelief that Humza Yousaf and the SNP have pushed through this crazy authoritarian draconian law, irrespective of all the criticisms that have come from senior members of the police, members of the judiciary, members of the public, the QCs, various bodies have all said this is not workable because the police have said that they will investigate absolutely every complaint. And although they've said they won't target comedians, they're going to end up investigating comedians if the complaints come in, because that's what they've pledged to do.
Well, that's it. So conceivably, and this is how ridiculous and unenforceable it is, if someone had reported you last night in the audience, the police would have had to have investigated you, wouldn't they?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And whether they would have taken it any further will come down to the individual police officer. We had Siobhan Brown from the SNP on the BBC the other day, and she was asked very clearly about this. You know, who makes the decision what to investigate and what not to investigate, how to take it forward? She said it's a matter of individual police judgment. Now, the problem with that, of course, is there are activists within the police force in Scotland. We've caught them at it before. Now, the fact that they're not going to pursue J.K. Rowling after she challenged them is partly probably just cowardice, because she's got a lot of power and clout behind her. But if it was a complaint about us, a bunch of comedians in a small room in Edinburgh, they might well have taken it further.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
There is a new and growing burden on the state, indeed on you, the taxpayer, and it is the number of people on long-term or short-term sickness disability. The numbers are literally mind-blowing. Economic inactivity due to long-term sickness now stands at 2.83 million people, while the number not participating in the labour market due to long and short-term illnesses has now broken 3 million for the first time. The astonishing thing with this figure is that it's nearly 4 times higher than it was 40 years ago. And think about 40 years ago, people working in mines, people working in factories, a lot more genuine industrial injuries. Most of this now is due to mental health, or should I say, without wishing to appear too harsh, the overdiagnosis of what is mental illness. Well, joining me to discuss this problem and perhaps more importantly what we can do about it is Chris Thomas from the Institute of Public Policy Research's Commission on Health and Prosperity. Chris, these numbers have gone up alarmingly since the pandemic.
They have. You're absolutely right. Firstly, that they are alarming. And yes, they've gone up since the pandemic. What we saw from kind of the 2000s onwards was actually an improvement. Those numbers were going down. But since 2019 and 2020, the numbers have shot up. And as you say, 3 million people economically inactive from a combined short-term, long-term sickness. That's the first time in the UK we've surpassed that figure, highest since records began. That's having a profound impact on the economy.
Yeah, no, well, not only is it very expensive in terms of benefits, it's also massively expensive in terms of the opportunity cost loss of those people being active within the economy. You see, I'm told that if you go on to mental health disability for depression or anxiety or whatever it may be, that you automatically qualify for another £390 a month in benefits with no obligation to go out and seek a job. And it's very difficult. You know, if you talk about this area, you can be seen to be heartless and harsh and cruel, but are we making it just too easy for not working due to depression or anxiety as being a lifestyle choice?
So I think the really important thing here, Nigel, is that when we look at the 3 million, we break down the 3 million. In fact, whilst mental health problems are very prevalent, you're right to say that they're very prevalent, the number of people with solely a mental health problem, i.e. that being their only diagnosis, is actually perishingly small. So the vast majority of people within that 3 million have multiple health conditions, i.e. they have a mental health condition and a physical health condition. And in fact, the majority have 3, 4, 5 health conditions. So I think there is a genuine complexity of need here that we're not really adequately meeting.
OK, now we've just been talking about smoking and the long-term effects that smoking can have, but things like obesity can have short-term serious health effects on very young people. Has there been any analysis of these 3 million as to how many would be described as being clinically obese?
So the data doesn't break down by weight. I would strongly suspect, and certainly there has been analysis of the interaction between obesity, the labour market, that shows that yes, it is a profound challenge within the economy. So I would suspect that there's something there that is at play. And I think that raises an incredibly valid point that we have objectively failed to get a grip on obesity in the last 20, 30, 40 years. It's remarkable to me that the obesity rate amongst children in the 1970s and 1980s, it was about 2%. Today, we have about a fifth of children entering primary school with obesity. And I don't think that's over the course of just 40 years in the span of history. I don't think that's a sudden moral failure of those people. I think that's down to the fact that the food on our shelves has got significantly more unhealthy, and we haven't really intervened against that.
No, well, I wouldn't mind having a bet that if we actually got some proper figures of the number of people with multiple health conditions, including anxiety, etc., who were severely overweight, I would bet the correlation would be very, very high. But of course, we'd be fattest to even suggest it. Now, Chris, come on, the IPPR, very respected, long-standing think tank. I want to hear from you one big idea of what we can do to try and improve this.
So, look, it's a complicated problem, but to give you one, Nigel, I think we need to finally get some long-term aspiration into this. So what we'd like to see is that we have a net zero for climate. That's a 30-year mission that every government department, every business, every individual has a role to play in bringing down. We know what the contributions are. We map it out, and we take it on as a cross-societal mission. I'd like there to be a net zero for health. What is the 30-year aspiration for health to make us the healthiest country in the world? And from that, what can every government department, every business, every individual, every community contribute to doing that? Because ultimately, I don't think there's a path to having a strong economy without sorting out the UK's quite dire population health. We are the literal sick man of Europe as it stands.
No, I think you're right. Chris Thomas, thank you very much indeed for coming on and talking about a very serious, very expensive and indeed growing problem. I'd love to see those figures of how many of the 3 million are clinically obese. I think we'd all be very, very shocked at the number. Now, joining me in my London studio, somebody who wasn't cancelled today because he didn't come to Brussels, but he would have been cancelled because he's a very, very bad human being who believes in the nation state. Sir Jacob, you would have been no doubt howled at by the Brussels police. What did you make of what you saw in Brussels today?
Well, it's outrageous that it is such hostility to freedom of speech and opposing democratically elected politicians. And you would have thought that by virtue of being elected, you have some cachet, some ability to speak. And it's really appalling that Brussels, Belgium, after all, a nation that we created after the Napoleonic Wars, never existed before we created it, should behave in this terrible way.
No, absolutely. Jacob, apart from the smoking ban, what is coming up on your show this evening?
Well, I'm going to be talking about you and Brussels and the smoking ban. Would the smoking ban bring you back to the Tory party?
Well, I have to say, under the current leadership, I think if Rishi Sunak had the choice, he'd probably ban alcohol too. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. Well, let's have a look now at the all-important weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello and welcome back to the latest update from the Met Office. Some showers will continue overnight, but otherwise it turns drier with clear spells and it turns chilly in places with our air now coming from the north. That's a cold direction. And with isobars opening out as well, lighter winds will mean a greater chance of a frost. There will be widespread clear skies across the UK as the showers fade away, although one or two showers will continue across Northern Ireland, parts of Wales and the southwest, more especially for northeast Scotland, the North Sea coast as well. Some of the showers in northern Scotland will be falling as snow because it's going to be a cold night, touch of frost here and there as we start off Wednesday. But beautiful blue skies for many of us, particularly through this central swathe of the UK. I think still the north and east of Scotland, eastern England, seeing a brisk breeze from the north and some showers. Also some showers elsewhere from the word go, but generally turning drier in many places by the afternoon, albeit rather cloudy. Northern Ireland seeing rain arrive, and it will feel cold here, 7 Celsius, not much better elsewhere, 11 to 13 degrees at their highest in the south. But Thursday starts off bright once again, chilly in places, and we keep the brightness across the south and southeast well into the afternoon, whilst the cloud thickens across the north and northwest, with outbreaks of rain moving south across Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. The rain clears up on Friday. The weekend looks very nice indeed.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Don't miss your chance to win our biggest prize so far. There's an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. Plus, courtesy of Variety Cruises, a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, your next holiday could be on us. Choose any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. We'll also send you packing with these luxury travel gifts. For another chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1